All right, Mike, I got a weird one for you tonight.
How weird?
Pretty freaking weird. It's pretty well reported on. It's just such an odd thing because they don't know if it's a creature or an entity or a spirit or what, but it has a few names. It's called the Grey Man, the Big Grey Man, or in traditional Scottish Gaelic, Amphir Leith Mór, which translates into Big Grey Man.
So basically Grey Man.
Yeah.
Just different variations of a Grey Man. Okay. All right. I'm with you so far.
The Grey Man is a creature that is said to roam the summit of Ben Macdui, which is the highest peak in the... Shit, I don't know how to say this, and I looked it up. I'm sorry. Cairngorms, which is a mountain range in eastern Highlands of Scotland. Sorry if I mispronounced it. I know I did.
Yeah, you definitely did.
You just made a sound. You didn't even try to read a word, you pig. So this takes place in a mountain setting in Scotland. Now, with what I've told you, just for shits and giggles, because this story goes everywhere, in your mind, what are you picturing this creature being or looking like? You can't say a big gray man. I'll kick your ass.
Well, I mean, what else would you describe it as? A big gray man? Like,
just from what you've heard, what is your mind projecting to you?
Based on what I've heard and the fact that he's called the Big Gray Man, I don't know how many old school nerds there are out there, but in the second edition Advanced Dungeons and Dragons Monster Manual, there's a whole section in the Monster Manual on giants, and there's a specific giant who's all gray, and he's wearing like a fucking like tattered purple toga looking thing, and he may or may not have a rock. I can't exactly recall, but that's what I picture in my head.
Nice, I like that. That's where my mind went too. But the descriptions of this things vary. It ranges from a 9-foot tall, completely hair-covered biped to a 35-foot tall, featureless humanoid.
I mean, that's quite different ends of the spectrum.
Yes. But there's a couple of things that always accompany an encounter with this thing. One is the sound of footsteps, presumably this thing walking behind you.
Is it like big booming footsteps like T-Rex? Like, or is it just like regular footsteps? Like, hey, there's somebody behind me and they're probably following me.
They say there's a couple of really good descriptions of these footsteps, but they say that they're a little bit heavier than a normal person and that the timing is of a long stride. So presumably something much bigger.
Interesting.
But the second thing that always accompanies an encounter with this thing is an overcoming with a sense of fear, dread, and even panic. So this thing may have like a psychic effect, because this is reported with almost, I think, all encounters with this thing, the same thing.
Well, it could be like that thing we've talked about a lot, like that we just call the fear, like, or the, when something weird happens and for no reason you get this overwhelming sense of fear or dread, and then after that occurs you see something or you see something alongside of it that inspires that. But it's not like a fear like if you're arachnophobic, like, oh shit, I can't get near a spider. It's like a deep down fear, and I think dread would probably be more like, it's not really a fear. It goes deeper than a fear.
Right. I agree. A dread is a much better word. It's
yeah.
A mortal fear, a cosmic fear.
And it makes me wonder if maybe it's more of a not so much the thing itself that inspires the fear, but what it does to our environment when it manifests, and the effect that it has on our physiology.
Mm-hmm.
Like maybe it's not so much a psychological thing. Maybe it's the way that it's affecting our body when it manifests into our, I guess, our reality, for lack of a better term. Not to say that it's outside of our reality, but it's outside of what's normal for us. And when these things come in, and you hear that a lot with a lot of weird supernatural or paranormal cases, with hauntings, with alien abduction scenarios, with demonic visitations, it's all accompanied by this deep sense of fear. And this kind of goes along with that. You know, it's this weird being that dwells in the mountains. So maybe it's a type of spirit.
That's a good point. And maybe that fear sensor or trigger or whatever that happens is the human's natural reaction, maybe a sense of those types of things. I mean, if we were in the woods by ourselves and we saw a couple of giant bears start walking towards us, I mean, the hairs on the back of our neck would stand up, because this could get ugly. We know that. But what if it's something we can't see, but our body can sense, and that's what it does?
Yeah, it's a very different sort of feeling, like when you're being faced with something that you are afraid of, but it's something tangible, something that you're at least somewhat familiar with. Like if you have a fear of spiders or a fear of water, that's a fear that you can see, a fear that you can actually touch and be a part of. Having a fear that you can't place, that's being kind of forced upon you, is a very unnerving experience. And I've only had that experience one time, really, and it's not like any other type of fear that I've ever had. It's not like a fear of heights or any phobia. It's I don't really know how to describe it if you haven't experienced it, but it's just really the type of thing that you just need to get away from.
Yeah, it's very primal and intense. It's, dread is good, but terror, when we're talking about the holy shit alarm that we always talk about, to me it's terror. It's sheer terror, almost like you want to cover your head and run or duck. It's almost that overwhelming.
Like it's almost too scary to run away from.
Yeah, exactly. And now, see, with all that being said, and we're in total agreement, it seems like this thing does this almost like as a power or a side effect of it being there, but more so than just the presence of a ghost or an entity. It's almost like, I don't know how else to say it, but maybe like an SCP, something that causes that same terror.
Like that's its power. It gives that off.
Exactly.
That's another D&D thing. A fear aura.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, but an example of this fear is mentioned in the earliest known account of a gray man sighting, which comes by way of a poem written by James Hogg in 1791. And he had said that he observed the gray man while tending sheep. And it's interesting once you read this poem. As far as I know that this is the whole poem, I don't know if it is. It's very short, and it's not really a fucking poem. It's just this guy telling his encounter. But it reads, quote, "It was a great blackamoor," which I have to apologize. I don't know what that was, and I looked it up, and that might be a racist term. At least 30 feet high and equally proportioned and very, very near me. I was actually struck powerless with astonishment and fear. So right off the bat, the first written account we have of this thing, he makes mention of a sense of fear and shock that makes him not able to move.
Can we just back up for a second before we get into the fear and the shock and all that? That is the shittiest poem that's ever been shitted out by any shitty poet ever. That was fucking god awful. That's like me saying, here's my poem about a blue jay. There was a blue jay. It was blue. It ate birdseed. It flew through the air. Like, fuck you. That's a shitty poem. You suck. Boo. Boo. All right, I'm sorry. Go on.
So after coming to his senses, he says, not in this poem, but he ran home and he even left his sheep behind.
Okay, wait. Let's just stop calling it a poem. Let's just call it a description because this guy's a shitty poet.
Maybe he had some other masterpiece that I didn't read about or something.
No, he didn't. His shit was really lame, and it was all just, my dearest love, you have feet and also a forehead. You are human. Shitty fucking poet. Fuck you. Boo.
All right, so the shitty non-poet was so terrified that he waited a whole day to return for his sheep. And when he did, sure enough, so had the gray man. Now, he says, after writing this poem that...
Non-poem.
Yes, non-poem, sorry. That once he saw it, he decided to take off his hat. And he said that the creature mimicked his movements, which led him to conclude that it was his shadow on the fog. Which could be. There was actually a British mountaineer named Frank Smythe who was able to duplicate this shadow casting effect many years later. But that still is almost nothing compared to the encounters that I have to go over. Because at this point, it sounds like it's debunked, but not according to some rather credible people. So we know you think this guy's a shitty poet, but do you think he was literally scared of his own shadow?
I don't know. Maybe he was using the story to sell his shitty poetry. Buy my poems. I was scared shitless when I wrote it.
It was a haiku, bro. Take it easy.
If it was a haiku, it'd be fine, but it wasn't, and he sucks. Boo.
Well, one question I have for you is that if this took place in 1791, don't you think that one of any of hundreds of years of sheep herders would have experienced the same phenomenon before?
Unless it was like one of those things that just manifests randomly, like with cases of poltergeist activity where it'll just kind of show up. Maybe it was attracted to something that happened and so it showed up, and then it's like, you know what? It's pretty nice here. I think I'm gonna hang out and see what happens. And then he just kind of lingers around in the periphery of this mountainous region, and every now and again he shows up and fucks with a sheep herder or a farmer or a traveler, and they get all scared and he gets a good kick out of it, and it's a good life for him, living in the mountains, being a great giant.
Yeah, I don't buy the fact that this is some type of trick of the light or fog or anything like that. Like I said, that this would have been reported before, especially since it's like perfect fodder for some folklore. You know, this could be a story that they tell kids to stay away from sheep herds. For, you know, the gray man will get you. But there's tons of places in similar conditions where this is not reported at all throughout history. So I definitely don't think it's some type of trick of the light, if you will.
It's not swamp gas.
Nope.
Or the old equivalent of a weather balloon.
It's funny that you mentioned that. I was listening to Realms of the Supernatural podcast, and Lee was mentioning how they were trying to explain some UFO sighting with ball lightning, and he's like, I would just want you guys to remember and realize that ball lightning is insane looking, and it is very tricky. There's some photos of ball lightning to where you can even say that really looks like a UFO. But that shit lasts for about 1 second. And I never...
Not all of it, dude. There's some ball lightning will put on some crazy displays and like jump across the sky and shit.
Well, yeah, it's not
There's-
flying around in patterns and hovering and all that shit.
No, but there's definitely been footage of ball lightning that I've seen that if you didn't know any better, you'd think it was a UFO. There's even been stories of ball lightning manifesting in the middle of a fucking plane. Like a plane was driving through the sky, and all of a sudden this ball lightning appeared inside of the plane among the passengers and fucking bolted through the cabin. Imagine witnessing that. That would be insane, dude.
Oh my God. Another instance where I die with shit in my pants.
It seems like there's a lot of instances. Just add it to the list.
Well, we talk about weird shit, so I think there's a lot of pants shitting that's called for.
All right, fair point.
So back to the big gray man. One of the more popular encounters with the big gray man comes from a dude named Professor John Norman Colley. He was a very well-respected, highly regarded, as well as highly decorated scientist, explorer, and mountaineer born in 1859. He even earned himself an election as a Fellow of the Royal Society and the Royal Society of Edinburgh, which is pretty much two organizations that are directly linked with the crown as far as like, hey, this is our official batch of badass motherfuckers. So he was no joke. This guy was actually conducting tests that would lead to the first medical x-rays. So this guy was pretty badass as far as being a scientist and all that stuff goes. But he ended up recounting an event during a speech at the 1925 27th annual general meeting of the, again, this weird area of mountains, the Cairngorm Club, which was just a meeting of climbers, explorers, and mountaineers. It's important to note that this encounter that he told in 1925 takes place in 1890. So he apparently held on to the story for quite some time. Now, I'm going to read a quote from his story that comes from a book I have, which I'll put in the show notes if anybody's interested. But he told how in 1890 he was climbing alone on Ben McDewey, 4,000 feet above sea level, when he had a terrifying experience. As he was returning from the cairn, I guess it's from what I understand, a cairn, or I guess is how you pronounce it. It's kind of like a rock formation at the bottom of a mountain, like a summit.
Cairn?
Yeah. Cairn.
Cairn.
What was I saying?
You're saying Karen.
Oh, okay.
Karen!
Yes, that's, I forget. Sorry. So yeah, that's like a rock like it's Skyrim, you know, a rock formation at the bottom of a summit. But he was returning from the cairn on the plateau where there was a heavy mist, and he had heard a crunching noise behind him, quote, as if someone was walking after me, but taking steps 3 or 4 times the length of my own. He told himself that it was nonsense, but as he walked on, the footsteps continued to sound behind him. Quote again, I was seized with terror and took to my heels, staggering blindly among the boulders 4 or 5 miles down till I hit the forest. So this is from a very highly decorated guy. So he's pretty much giving the first account of these footsteps, but also again the sensation of terror and fear without actually seeing anything. I might add, this sensation has just appeared.
That's I think that when you get the fear without seeing anything, especially if it's that deep down fear, I think that there's that's your body warning you that there's something going on. It's
Absolutely.
Like, hey, wake the fuck up. There's a gray man that's about to fucking throw a rock at your head.
Yeah.
But it's either that or you have schizophrenia and you're super paranoid. One of the two.
So here's a direct quote from Professor Colley. Mike, you want to read that?
He's a professor?
Yeah, he is. I said, he's a badass.
What a pompous prick, I bet he is. I was returning home from the cairn on the summit in a mist where I began to think I heard something else than merely the noise of my own footsteps. For every few steps I took, I heard a crunch, and then another crunch, as if someone was walking after me, but taking steps 3 or 4 times the length of my own. I said to myself, "This is all nonsense." I listened and heard it again, and could see nothing in the mist. As I walked on, and the eerie crunch sounded behind me, I was seized with terror, and took to my heels, staggering blindly among the boulders, for 4 or 5 miles, nearly down, I can't pronounce that, to a forest. Whatever you make of it, I don't know, but there is something very queer about the top of Ben McDoy, and I will not go back there again. By myself, I know.
All right, bravo.
Thank you.
But that's a pretty solid quote from somebody who's legit, you know, doesn't have a history of hitting the bottle or smoking crack rocks.
No crack rocks for that guy.
You don't become a professor by sucking the glass dick.
The glass dick. All right.
You never heard of that one before,
No,
Mike?
I haven't. I'm a huge fan, though. I love
it. Whew. All right. Well, something that's interesting about this professor's story is that he had actually told this story 23 years earlier to some friends in New Zealand, who then told it to the newspaper, and they had ran an article called "The Professor's Panic." And another mountaineer saw this article and wrote to Colley, and his experience goes as follows. Now, he died in 1921, it says, so this his sighting must have predated Professor Colley's. So he says that him and his brother Henry had been chipping rocks for crystals late one afternoon when they saw a giant figure coming down towards them from the cairn. It passed out of sight briefly in a dip, and as the two men fled down the mountainside, again in mist, both of them were convinced that they were being followed by the giant. So this was a report that apparently predates Professor Colley's, and that was made by a dude named Dr. A.M. Kellis. So this is another professor, mountaineer, explorer guy. Not recreational sportsmen people. These are all people with degrees that are seeing this thing. People that should be up there because they have work up there.
So you're saying degree equals credibility?
A little bit. I mean, like I said,
wow.
a little bit. If there was a sighting of something like this in the mountains, I'm more likely to believe a professor, a decorated professor, than some tweaker camper guy who said he saw something in the bushes. I think that somebody who's a professor.
But what about Joe Everybody that saw something in the bushes? What if he's like, "Hey, I'm Joe Everybody. I'm a guy who does normal things and has kids probably and is married maybe and has a dog."
Okay, maybe not credibility then. Maybe rationality. Is that better for you?
No, but I'll take it for now.
All right, good. The next sighting I have comes from a dude named Peter Densham, who was a mountaineer and airplane rescue worker in the Cairngorms during World War II, who had told his encounter to a journalist. So he says that he was sitting drinking water on the summit, and suddenly he was looking across and the mist closed in all around him. He said he sat there and he was eating chocolate, and then a curious, strange noise, which he attributed to the expansion and contraction of the rocks, when he had a strong feeling that there was someone near him. He then felt cold on the back of his neck and a sense of pressure. He stood up and heard crunching noises from directions of the cairn. He went towards the cairn to investigate, and it says, quote, "not in the least frightened." Then suddenly he experienced a feeling of apprehension and found himself running towards a place called Lurcher's Craig, where it's a sheer drop. I tried to stop myself and found that it was extremely difficult to do so. It was as if somebody was pushing me. I managed to deflect my course, but with a great deal of difficulty. He ran most of the way back down the mountain. Again, we get the crunching noises and the panic. Now, with such detailed descriptions of encounters, are you starting to believe that we're dealing with a certain type of entity up here instead of people seeing shadows?
Yeah, but with all these things, now, I don't want to be the Joe Nickel of the show, but sometimes it falls on me to be that guy, so I guess I'll be that guy.
I bet the people listening are saying, "But you are the Joe Nickel of the show."
I know. It was goddamn barn owls. That's what it was. I think that a lot can be said for being superstitious or believing in folktales that you hear. And when you have a reputable source that's giving a story that they saw something out of this world or paranormal or terrifying or monstrous in this certain area, and if you happen to be traveling alone and start thinking about these stories, maybe things can occur that seem to seem that may seem scarier or larger than they are. Like maybe this whole story got started because there was this guy who was abnormally tall that was also like a beggar on the road, and the guy just took it the wrong way. The first witness, he's like, "Oh my God." I don't know. Maybe it's a family of really tall guys that just fucking they've got a strange, odd complexion. Maybe it's not a giant, and people just get all freaked out, and then they go home. Why does everybody always run from us? We just want to make friends. And then Big Daddy Gray Man is like, "It's all right, Junior. Someday we'll find other gray men, and when we find the other gray men, you'll have so many friends. You'll be the most popular kid in the gray man school." But there is no gray man school. That's just Papa Gray Man blowing smoke up his son's ass. And then when his son grows up, he's a bitter gray man, and he tells his son the same bullshit that he was fed, and he perpetuates the whole goddamn thing. And everybody's pissed off, and that's just the life of a gray man, baby. Pissed off on a mountain.
It's your destiny, gray man.
But seriously, it is strange that you're seeing similar reports from a lot of academics, I guess we'll say. Not to say that they're any more reputable than Joe Everybody, but they. I think that an academic would be less likely to concoct some stupid story about being chased by a giant gray man. But it's interesting that the story is kind of that it's happened to more than one person over a period of time. It's not just like something that occurred over the span of a week or a month.
Right. And just such descriptions of the same thing, the footsteps and the fear. I mean, this is taking place during World War II, but, between Professor Colley's report and this guy, there was a report in 1904 from a dude named Hugh D. Welsh, who reported, quote, hearing slurring footsteps near the summit of Ben McDewey and had an eerie feeling of apprehension. So again, this is with this Peter Dasham dude, the third person reporting the same thing. And Dasham actually reported another incident that happened. And this is kind of a weird twist, like one of the first ones in this weird story anyway. But the book says here, a quote from this book, another occasion, Dasham was on the mountain with his friend Richard Frary, searching for an aeroplane that was reported to have crashed. They were sitting close to the cairn when Densham was surprised to hear Frary apparently talking to himself on the other side of the cairn. When he realized that Frary was talking to someone else, Quote, I went around and found myself joining in on the conversation. It was a strange experience which seemed to have a psychic aspect. We talked to somebody invisible for some time. Afterwards, neither of us strangely could recall the purport of this extraordinary conversation.
That's crazy. That sounds like fairy stuff.
It sure does. It kind of, again, not tricks of shadows and fog and mist. And
no, that's something completely different. You're talking about some vague notion of a conversation that may or may not have happened that you don't have recollection of who you were talking to, and that's a whole other level of shit. That's the type of things you hear in fairy encounters,
right?
And especially with children talking about when I guess it would be considered lost time as an adult, but with children that would lose track of time, and they would say that they were with somebody, but they couldn't remember who they were, and they were gone for a while, but they had no recollection of it. Like, to them, it seemed like minutes.
Interestingly enough, author of the book The Big Gray Man of MacDoobie, which is a dude named Affleck Gray, tracked down Richard Frary, who said he didn't remember the conversation he had on the mountain, which is exactly what was supposed to happen. But he said he'd witnessed just as many disturbing things at MacDoobie. He says, another quote from the book, sorry, you have to deal with my horrible reading. He described the mountain as the most mysterious mountain I have ever been on. He told Gray of a day when he had climbed to the high pass of Larrig Grue of Ben Macdui, and sat gazing down on the cliffs at Lurcher's Crag with his cascade of water. Then he found himself slipping into a, quote, weird and disagreeable train of thought, so he stood up and started to walk. But the gloom turned to a sense of deep depression and apathy. Then suddenly he became certain that he was not alone. Quote, very close to me, permeating the air which moved so softly in the summer's wind, there was a presence, utterly abstract but intensely real. He continued, the silence of the mountain was violated by an intensely high singing note, a sound which was just within oral capacity, which never rose or fell. The sound, it seemed, was coming from the very soil of the mountain. This sound continued until he was below Lurcher's Crag, when the music became so faint that he was not sure whether it was there at all. But the abstract presence seemed to cling to him, quote, with some sort of desperate eagerness, as if it passionately desired to leave the mountain which it haunted. Then there was a momentary flash of terror, then it was gone.
Just a momentary flash.
Of terror, yeah.
Huh.
Now, the book I have goes off into some other stuff about this note that this guy's hearing on the mountain, and I didn't have time to go into that. It kind of goes off to the left a little bit. It mentions a lady named Rosalind Haywood, who has a biography called The Infinite Hive. But she goes into...
That is such an awesome name for a book, though.
A biography, too.
The Infinite Hive. Awesome.
Yeah. But she goes into what she calls the singing, and it's a sound that she says permeates from the earth. It's like pretty much a tone that the earth makes. There's some quick quip that there's only one place that she hasn't been able to hear it, and I guess it was in the London subway. I guess she wasn't able to do it, but she akined it to putting like a seashell to your ear. But she says almost every place has it. This ringing sound is duplicated in other mountainous ranges. So if you're interested in that, definitely check out her book. But this Richard Frary guy also told a story about a friend of his who he didn't want to give up his name, but he said that he, to win a bet, spent the night on Ben Macdui. And quoting this book, it says here, he set up his tent by the summit cairn on a January night. He also began to experience the familiar sense of unreality and the morbidity, analytical directioning of thought. He did not feel in any way mad. The terror which possessed him concerned the imminent impact of knowledge which he knew would always set him aside from his fellows. It was as if he was the unwilling recipient of a vast range of new revolutionary impulses built right up into some all-powerful mind. And the mind was neither human nor anti-human. It just had nothing to do with him at all. It goes on to say he fell asleep and woke up, quote, to a fear of a more terrifying nature. Moonlight fell through the crack of the fly sheet of his tent, and as he stared at it, he saw a brown blur and, quote, knew that something lay between himself and the moon. He lay there and frozen.
I wonder what he means by brown blur. I'm sorry to cut you off, but that seems really weird, especially at night under the light of the moon. A brown blur.
Mm-hmm. He lay there in frozen immobility until his shadow went away. He now pulled aside the fly sheet of the tent. The night was brilliant. About 20 yards away, a great brown creature was swaggering down the hill. He used the word swaggering because the creature had an air of insolent strength about it. His impression was that the creature was about 20 feet high and was covered with the shortish brown hair. It was too erect to be a huge ape. It had a tapering waist and very broad shoulders. So now we have the introduction of what I guess, they're making the distinction from an ape. So maybe just a fur-covered, all hairy, featureless creature.
Or maybe this place is one of those window areas, like the Skinwalker Ranch, where all manner of phenomena can occur. And because we're dealing with things crossing over from different planes of existence, it's creating that feeling of fear. And that's why you've got the gray man, but now you've got the something that sounds more akin to a Bigfoot sighting. And then you've got the sometimes feeling of fear with nothing physical being present as well. Maybe there's something more to it. I'd be curious to know if there were maybe lights in the sky reported in the area from time to time, or things like will-o'-the-wisps or strange lights on the mountain itself.
I don't know. My brain tells me it's something different than a Bigfoot. I don't know if I buy the Bigfoot thing. But the book also mentioned that there was some photos of tracks that were supposed to be of an abominable snowman that were taken in the area in 1951. But I think you'd be able to tell the difference between a, quote, Bigfoot footprint and something that's 20, 25 feet tall.
Oh, yeah, definitely. But it's taking on more of a bestial appearance than just the giant gray man.
Yeah.
Now it's got fur and it's brown, and maybe it's just some little weak pansy thing that's just able to manipulate its shape or its appearance the way it appears to other people. So it appears like this big, huge monster, and it's really like this little guy. It looks like Fezzik from Princess Bride.
To me, this thing looks like Cousin It with arms and legs and short hair.
That's good too. It's like, you know what? I will be big and huge and scary, and then he manifests this huge body for himself. Then just it's all appearance. It's like the Wizard of Oz. All pomp, no circumstance.
Well, one of the last encounters that I have here comes from writer Wendy Wood, who wrote of her experience on the mountain, claiming while preparing to climb back down the mountain, she heard a voice, quote, of gigantic resonance close behind her. And she said, quote, it seemed to speak with the harsh consonants and full vowels of Gaelic. But so clear was the voice that she started to look around for an injured or lost climber around her area where her camp was. She said she walked in a wandering circle pattern around her camp to see if she could find any person that was calling out, until she suddenly felt that she was not alone. At this point, she was alarmed and she returned back to her camp. She grabbed her gear and headed down the mountain, but as soon as she started walking down the mountain, she heard loud footsteps coming from behind her, just like in all the other cases. But she said that these footsteps were almost on top of her. She was now terrified and she wanted to avoid panicking in such a dangerous environment. And she thought to herself to listen to these secondary footsteps to see if they were echoes of her own footsteps. But she noticed that they were just as sporadic and natural as her own, but they never coincided with her footsteps at any point. And she wrote about that in her book, The Secret of Spay, which she goes into detail in her book and lends the theory of stone tape, that maybe it sounds from the past.
Like stone tape, like the Shaver Mysteries type stuff?
Yeah.
The Richard Shaver Stone Library?
Well, no, just like like they say, how Gettysburg is. It's just like the Earth records an event that happens there.
Oh, okay. Like the unintelligent hauntings.
Yes.
I gotcha. Okay.
So again, this is the, sixth person to report the exact same thing.
Do you know if any battles ever occurred here? Like if there are any big battles in history that were waged around this area?
I did not know. Like we were talking before the show, it's kind of a stupid story, but I heard about this in one of my books a long time ago, and I had a bookmark in it as something that we can revisit. I just didn't think there was enough to cover the subject enough for a complete episode. And I came across a video on YouTube, and they just spout off all these accounts of people encountering the big gray man. So I said, shit, with that mixed with the information from the book, I should be able to do a whole show. And I couldn't find the goddamn book. So I wrote down the title of the book. I went to look for it in the library. I couldn't find it. I came back home and started looking through my books, and I found where the book that had the shit about the big gray man in it. And it ended up being the exact book that I went to the library to look for. I was actually looking for a book I already had that I was getting information from. But there's just so many other accounts of this happening. And it branches off into so many different weird ways. But I didn't even get to check that video to see if any of those sightings correspond with any of my sightings. So there could be a lot more going on. A lot more. So
you're saying there could be a sequel to this episode? Maybe.
But I just...
Be on the lookout for Gray Man Part 2. This time, he's more gray.
And more man. I just thought I wasn't going to have enough to do a whole episode, and I ended up having to leave a bunch of stuff out. But one of the stranger ones, the last one I have here, comes from a couple of characters. One captain, Sir Hugh Rankin, and his wife. He was a Buddhist, and she was a Zen Buddhist, and they were cycling around an area called Largargu. And they said that they suddenly felt, quote, a presence behind them. And they turned to see a big olive complexioned man dressed in a long robe and sandals with long flowing hair. They said, quote, we were not in the least afraid. Being Buddhists, we at once knew who it was. We at once knelt and made obedience. They had instantly recognized the stranger as a Bodhisattva? You got it. You know it. One of the 5, quote, perfect men who control the destinies of this world. And they meet once a year in a cave in the Himalayas. But according to Sir Hugh, the presence addressed them in a language that he thought was Sanskrit, and he replied respectfully in Urdu. All the time, go ahead, Mike.
Bodhisattva
was with us. He gave us a time of about 10 minutes. A heavenly host of musicians was playing high up in the sky. Immediately,
I'm sorry. Bodhisattva
left us, the music ceased, and we never heard it again. So this is an even stranger, different encounter with a different creature.
That's what I'm saying. Like, this really sounds like it's one of those window areas where all manner of batshit happenings occur. I bet there's people in the fucking towns below that have been abducted, either by aliens or fairies, one of the two. Maybe both. Maybe fucking both.
Yeah, definitely weird stuff. And again, even if it is one of these active areas or one of these areas where the veil is thinned, it's such a concentration of one event, one type of event.
Maybe it's not just this type of event. Like I'm really curious now about this area and if there's other things that have occurred here, if it's just the gray man and occasionally a hairy thing and also occasionally a bodhisattva. But I wonder if maybe there's other cryptid sightings or like strange animal sightings, or lights in the sky, like I mentioned previously. I'm just curious if there's other weird shit that's going on in the area, and we're just reading about the green man or gray man, so therefore the gray man is the only thing happening. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, definitely. That's what I was trying to. I don't know why I didn't conclude with that when I was blabbing about the book and the video and finding research, is that I just ended up finding so much in this book that there's so much I left out. And one thing I wanted to do really bad was research the area. So if we do a part two,
we will do part 2, the graining.
Yes, the graining, and I will do a little bit of research on the area to see if anything like that's happened. I mean, one thing I found that was interesting is when I looked up this shitty poet, somebody
Let's just not even call him a poet. Let's just call him a shit sandwich.
So somebody described his poem as an encounter with something called a Brockenspector.
What is that?
Translates to a mountain spirit.
There you go. It's like a fucking troll.
Yeah, like a spectral troll.
Yeah, dude.
Ghost troll. Dun 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 dun. Ghost troll.
It's a spooky ghost troll.
So that's it for the big gray man.
Or is it?
Or is it?
Dun dun dun.
Thank you for listening to the Whatcast. You can find us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, iTunes, and YouTube. Enjoy the podcast. Get yourself a Whatcast t-shirt or a sticker pack. Who was that dude on that one episode? Try the links in Homie's page. All this and more can be found at www.thewhatcasters.com. Thanks again for listening and have a great week.